So in this lecture now, we're going to discuss application of all of the NMR concepts that we've seen in previous videos towards structural elucidation. And structural elucidation, right, means that we are going to determine a likely or plausible structure for an NMR spectrum. And generally, you'll be given the proton NMR spectrum. Perhaps, depending on the course, you may be given an IR or a carbon-13 NMR spectrum as well. But here we're going to focus on proton NMR, and we'll be given the molecular formula. So there's a series of steps that are best to take when you're trying to determine the unknown. And these can vary depending on the spectrum. Not every spectrum is solved the same way. But if you rely on these four general guidelines, that should give you a nice sort of criteria for how to best and most efficiently determine your molecule. So given the molecular formula, you first want to calculate the degrees of unsaturation. And this is a concept that we talked about in a previous video. And the degrees of unsaturation, also known as the index of hydrogen deficiency,